Section 35 of A Popular History of France, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate Mackenzie. A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times, Volume 4, by François Guizot. Translated by Robert Black. Chapter 33. Charles IX and the Religious Wars, 1560 to 1574, Part 1. We now enter upon the era of the civil wars, massacres, and assassinations caused by religious fanaticism or committed on religious pretexts. The latter half of the 16th century is the time at which the human race saw the opening of that great drama of which religious liberty is the beginning and the end, and France was then the chief scene of it. At the close of the 15th and at the commencement of the 16th centuries, religious questions had profoundly agitated Christian Europe, but towards the middle of the latter century they had obtained in the majority of European states solutions which, however incomplete, might be regarded as definitive. Germany was divided into Catholic states and Protestant states, which had established between themselves relations of an almost pacific character. Switzerland was entering upon the same course. In England, Scotland, the Low Countries, the Scandinavian states, and the free towns their neighbours, the Reformation had prevailed, or was clearly tending to prevail. In Italy, Spain, and Portugal, on the contrary, the Reformation had been stifled, and Catholicism remained victorious. It was in France that, notwithstanding the inequality of forces, the struggle between Catholicism and Protestantism was most obstinately maintained and appeared for the longest time uncertain. After half a century of civil wars and massacres, it terminated in Henry IV, a Protestant king who turned Catholic but who gave Protestants the Edict of Nantes, a precious though insufficient and precarious pledge which served France as a point of departure towards religious liberty, and which protected it for nearly a century in the midst of the brilliant victory won by Catholicism. Note: the Edict of Nantes, published by Henry IV in 1598, was revoked by Louis XIV in 1685. For more than 3 centuries, civilized Europe has been discussing, pro or con, the question of religious liberty, but from instinct and with passion far more than with a serious understanding of what is at the bottom of things. Even in our own day, it is not without difficulty that a beginning is being made to understand and accept that principle in its true sense and in all its bearings. Men were wonderfully far from it in 1560, at the accession of Charles IX, a child 10 years old. They were entering, in blind confidence, upon a religious war, in order to arrive, only after 4 centuries of strife and misconception, at a vindication of religious liberty. "Woe to thee, O country, that hast a child for king," said, in accordance with the Bible, the Venetian Michael Suriano, ambassador to France at that time. Around that royal child, and seeking to have the mastery over France by being masters over him, were struggling the 3 great parties at that time occupying the stage in the name of religion. The Catholics rejected altogether the idea of religious liberty for the Protestants. The Protestants had absolute need of it, for it was their condition of existence. But they did not wish for it in the case of the Catholics, their adversaries. The third party, Thiers' party, as we call it nowadays, wished to hold the balance continually wavering between the Catholics and the Protestants, conceding to the former and the latter, alternately, that measure of liberty which was indispensable for most imperfect maintenance of the public peace, and reconcilable with the sovereign power of the kingship. On such conditions was the government of Charles IX to establish its existence. The death of Francis II put an end to a grand project of the Guises, which we do not find expressly indicated elsewhere than in the Memoirs of Michel de Castelnau, one of the best informed and most intelligent historians of the time. "Many Catholics," says he, were then of opinion that, if the authority of the Duke of Guise had continued to be armed with that of the king as it had been, the Protestants would have had enough to do. For orders had been sent to all the principal lords of the kingdom, officers of the crown, and knights of the order, to show themselves in the said city of Orleans on Christmas Day at the opening of the states, for that they might be all made to sign the confession of the Catholic faith in presence of the king and the chapter of the order, together with all the members of the privy council, reporting masters of petitions, domestic officers of the king's household, and all the deputies of the estates. The same confession was to be published throughout all the said kingdom, in order to have it sworn by all the judges, magistrates, and officers, and, finally, all private persons from parish to parish. And, in default of doing so, proceedings were to be taken by seizures, condemnations, executions, banishments, and confiscations. And they who did repent themselves and abjured their Protestant religion were to be absolved. It is not to be supposed that, even if circumstances had remained as they were under the reign of Francis II, such a plan could have been successful; but it is intelligible that the Guises had conceived such an idea. They were victorious. They had just procured the condemnation to death of the most formidable amongst the Protestant princes, their adversary, Louis de Condé. They were threatening the life of his brother, the King of Navarre, and the house of Bourbon seemed to be on the point of disappearing beneath the blows of the ambitious, audacious, and by no means scrupulous house of Lorraine. Not even the prospect of Francis II.'s death arrested the Guises in their work and their hopes. When they saw that he was near his end, they made a proposal to the queen mother to unite herself completely with them, leaving the Prince of Conde to execution, rid herself of the King of Navarre, and become regent of the kingdom during the minority of her son Charles, taking them, the Lorraine princes and their party, for necessary partners in her government. But Catherine de' Medici was more prudent, more judicious, and more egotistical in her ambition than the Guises were in theirs. She was not, as they were, exclusively devoted to the Catholic party. It was power that she wanted, and she sought for it every day amongst the party or the mixtures of parties in a condition to give it her. She considered the Catholic party to be the strongest, and it was hers; but she considered the Protestant party strong enough to be feared, and to give her a certain amount of security and satisfaction; a security necessary, moreover, if peace at home and not civil war were to be the habitual and general condition of France. Catherine was, finally, a woman, and very skilful in the strifes of court and of government, whilst, on the field of battle, the victories, though won in her name, would be those of the Guises more than her own. Without openly rejecting the proposals they made to her under their common apprehension of Francis II.'s approaching death, she avoided making any reply. She had, no doubt, already taken her precautions and her measures in advance. Her confidante, Jacqueline de Longwy, Duchess of Montpensier, and a zealous Protestant, had brought to her rooms at night Anthony de Bourbon, King of Navarre, and Catherine had come to an agreement with him about the partition of power between herself and him at the death of the king her son. She had written to the Constable de Montmorency, a rival of the Guises, and their foe, though a staunch Catholic, to make haste to Orleans, where his presence would be required. As soon as Chancellor de l'Hopital became aware of the proposals which were being made by the Guises to the queen mother, he flew to her and opposed them with all the energy of his great and politic mind and sterling nature. Was she going to deliver the Prince of Conde to the scaffold, the house of Bourbon to ruin France to civil war, and the independence of the crown and of that royal authority which she was on the point of wielding herself, to the tyrannical domination of her rivals, the Lorraine princes, and of their party? Catherine listened with great satisfaction to this judicious and honest language. When the crown passed to her son Charles, she was free from any serious anxiety as to her own position and her influence in the government. The new king, on announcing to the Parliament the death of his brother, wrote to them that, confiding in the virtues and prudence of the queen mother, he had begged her to take in hand the administration of the kingdom with the wise counsel and advice of the King of Navarre and the notables and great personages of the late king's council. A few months afterwards the States General, assembling first at Orleans and afterwards at Pontoise, ratified this declaration by recognizing the placement of the young King Charles IX.'s guardianship in the hands of Catherine de' Medici, his mother, together with the principal direction of affairs, but without the title of regent. The King of Navarre was to assist her in the capacity of lieutenant general of the kingdom. 25 members, specially designated, were to form the king's privy council. And in the privacy of her motherly correspondence, Catherine wrote to the Queen of Spain, her daughter Elizabeth, wife of Philip II, "Madame, my dear daughter, all I shall tell you is, not to be the least anxious, and to rest assured that I shall spare no pains to so conduct myself that God and everybody may have occasion to be satisfied with me. You have seen the time when I was as happy as you are, not dreaming of ever having any greater trouble than that of not being loved as I should have liked to be by the king your father. God took him from me, and is not content with that. He has taken from me your brother, whom I loved you well know how much, and has left me with 3 young children, and in a kingdom where all is division, having therein not a single man in whom I can trust, and who has not some particular object of his own." The Queen Mother of France, who wrote to her daughter the Queen of Spain with such firmness of tone and such independence of spirit, was, to use the words of the Venetian ambassador John Michieli, who had lived at her court, a woman of 43, of affable manners, great moderation, superior intelligence, and ability in conducting all sorts of affairs, especially affairs of state. As mother, she has the personal management of the king. She allows no one else to sleep in his room, she is never away from him. As regent and head of the government, she holds everything in her hands, public offices, benefices, graces, and the seal which bears the king's signature, and which is called the cachet, privy seal or signet. In the council, she allows the others to speak. She replies to anyone who needs it. She decides according to the advice of the council, or according to what she may have made up her own mind to. She opens the letters addressed to the king by his ambassadors and by all the ministers. She has great designs, and does not allow them to be easily penetrated. As for her way of living, she is very fond of her ease and pleasure. She observes few rules. She eats and drinks a great deal. She considers that she makes up for it by taking a great deal of exercise afoot and a horseback. She goes a hunting, and last year she always joined the king in his stag chases through the woods and thick forests, a dangerous sort of chase for anyone who is not an excellent rider. She has an olive complexion, and is already very fat. Accordingly the doctors have not a good opinion of her life. She has a dower of 300,000 francs a year, double that of other queens dowager. She was formerly always in money difficulties and in debt. Now she not only keeps out of debt, but she spends and gives more liberally than ever. As soon as the reign of Charles IX. And the Queen Mother's government were established, notice was sent to the Prince of Condé that he was free. He refused to stir from prison. He would wait, he said, until his accusers were confined there. He was told that it was the king's express order, and was what Francis II. On his deathbed had himself impressed upon the King of Navarre. Condé determined to set out for La Fère, a place belonging to his brother Anthony de Bourbon, and there await fresh orders from the king. In February 1561 he left La Fère for Fontainebleau. On his road to Paris his friends flocked to him and made him a splendid escort. On approaching the king's palace, Condé separated himself from his following, and advanced alone with 2 of his most faithful friends. All the lords of the court, the Duke of Guise amongst them, went to meet him. On the 15th of March he was admitted to the privy council. Chancellor de l'Hopital, on the prince's own demand, affirmed that no charge had been found against him. The king declared his innocence in a deed signed by all the members of the council; and on the 13th of June, in solemn session, the Parliament of Paris, sitting as a court of peers, confirmed this declaration. Notwithstanding the Duke of Guises' co-operation in all these acts, Conde desired something of a more personal kind on his part. On the 24th of August at Saint-Germain, in presence of the king, the queen mother, the princes, and the court, the Duke of Guise, in reply to a question from the king, protested that he had not and would never have desired to put forward anything against the prince's honour, and that he had been neither the author nor the instigator of his imprisonment. "Sir," said Conde, "I consider wicked and contemptible him or them who caused it." "So I think, sir," answered Guise, "and it does not apply to me at all." Whereupon they embraced, and a report was drawn up of the ceremony, which was called their reconciliation. Just as it was ending, Marshal Francis de Montmorency, eldest son of the constable, and far more inclined than his father was towards the cause of the Reformers, arrived with a numerous troop of friends, whom he had mustered to do honour to Conde. The court was a little excited at this incident. The constable declared that, having the honour to be so closely connected with the princes of Bourbon, his son would have been to blame if he had acted differently. The aged warrior had himself negotiated this reconciliation, and when it was accomplished, and the Duke of Guise had performed his part in it with so much complaisance, the constable considered himself to be quits with his former allies, and free to follow his leaning towards the Catholic party. The veteran, says the Duke of Autnal, did not pique himself on being a theologian, but he was sincerely attached to the Catholic faith, because it was the old religion and the king's, and he separated himself definitively from those religious and political innovators whom he had at first seemed to countenance, and amongst whom he reckoned his nearest relatives. In vain did his eldest son try to hold him back. A close union was formed between the Constable de Montmorency, the Duke of Guise, and Marshal de Saint-Andre, and it became the Catholic triumvirate against which Catherine de' Medici had at one time to defend herself, and of which she had at another to avail herself in order to carry out the policy of seesaw she had adopted as her chief means of government. Before we call to mind and estimate as they deserve the actions of that government, we must give a correct idea of the moral condition of the people governed, of their unbridled passions, and of the share of responsibility reverting to them in the crimes and shocking errors of that period. It is a mistake and an injustice only too common to lay all the burden of such facts, and the odium justly due to them, upon the great actors, almost exclusively whose name has remained attached to them in history. The people themselves have very often been the prime movers in them. They have very often preceded and urged on their masters in the black deeds which have sullied their history, and on the masses as well as on the leaders ought the just sentence of posterity to fall. The moment we speak of the Saint Bartholomew, it seems as if Charles IX., Catherine de' Medici, and the Guises issued from their grave to receive that sentence, and God forbid that we should wish to deliver them from it; but it hits the nameless populace of their day as well as themselves, and the hands of the people far more than the will of kings began the tale of massacres for religion's sake. This is no vague and general assertion, and, to show it, we shall only have to enumerate, with their dates, the principal facts of which history has preserved the memory, whilst stigmatizing them, with good reason, as massacres or murders. The greater number, as was to be expected, are deeds done by Catholics, for they were by far the more numerous and more frequently victorious. But Protestants also have sometimes deserved a place in this tragic category, and when we meet with them, we will assuredly not blot them out. Section 35.